It's a sickness in your brain, just like if you were trying to pass for white.
You mean I'm not white?
Oh, sit down.
This is a scandal! What do you mean I'm not white? Why didn't you tell me this before?
A lot of people talk about stand-up comedy nowadays. Some casual fans of stand-up will attend live shows and watch comedy specials in their spare time without ever really diving deep into the history of the art form. If you ask many comedians nowadays who their influences are, there's one name that you will hear over and over again, no matter what. This comedian is
Richard Pryor.
Richard Pryor.
Richard Pryor.
Richard Pryor.
Richard Pryor.
Who is Richard Pryor? Some fans of comedy consider him to be the greatest comedian of all time. He is certainly one of the most influential men to ever pick up a microphone and tell jokes. And as a young black man, he carved his path out in comedy when racial tensions in the United States were still incredibly high. Richard Pryor was a man of many talents, many crafts, and also many wives. Louis C.K., Patrice O'Neal, Eddie Murphy, Dave Chappelle, some of the greatest comedians in the world have vocalized just how special Richard Pryor was as a comedian and how he influenced them in their formative years of finding their comedic voice. And as funny as Richard Pryor was, along with that came some serious personal issues in his life that really just wrestled with his ability to live a sustainable, balanced life while on the road performing stand-up comedy. What is it that made Richard Pryor such an intriguing person and comedian? By the end of this video, you will know exactly who Richard Pryor is, where he came from, some of the amazing work he's done, some of the darkest points in his life and career, and what makes his style of comedy so illustrious and renowned. This is Richard Pryor, the comedy trailblazer. On December 1st, 1940, Richard Franklin Lennox Thomas Pryor Sr. was born in Peoria, Illinois. In addition to having like 3 first names, Richard grew up in a brothel that was run by his grandmother named Marie Carter. Unless you're Charlie Sheen, growing up in a brothel seems like it is an absolutely brutal life for a child. I can imagine this led to many early points of trauma for Richard. Not only was his grandmother running the brothel, but Richie's mother Gertrude Thomas was employed there as a prostitute. In addition to his mom being a sex worker, Richie's father, Leroy Buck Carter Pryor, was a pimp, which is how he met Richie's mother, Gertrude. Aside from the incredibly romantic Cinderella love story between these two model citizens, Leroy was also a professional boxer and hustler. This unconventional and often chaotic environment of the brothel exposed Richie to a variety of characters and situations that would later become comedic fodder for his stand-up routines. Richie's relationship with his mother, Gertrude, was complicated and marked by hardship. One particularly poignant moment in his life was his mother's decision to abandon him at just 10 years old. The circumstances surrounding Gertrude's departure were influenced by the challenging environment in which Richard was raised. It's presumed that the reason for her leaving Richie was a combination of personal hardships, including financial difficulties, and the demanding nature of her promiscuous lifestyle. This abandonment had a profound impact on Richard Pryor, shaping his worldview and influencing the themes he would later explore in his comedy act. The absence of a stable maternal presence in his life became a recurring theme in Richie's stand-up routines and contributed to the development of his unique comedic perspective. With his mother out of the picture, Richie's main maternal figure in his life was his grandmother Marie. Unfortunately for Richie, his grandmother was an incredibly aggressive mother figure who would physically abuse him anytime he acted odd or different from what she believed to be that of an ordinary child's behavior. Richie was one of 4 children raised in his grandmother's brothel. His siblings include Patricia, Marie, and Jimmy Lee Pryor, who were all younger than Richard. In addition to the incredibly brutal circumstances surrounding their childhood, Richard would have to help his grandmother look out for his younger brother and sisters. Richie's childhood would continue to be filled with themes of brutality when at the early age of 7 years old, he would be sexually abused. This early trauma would take a heavy emotional toll on Richard, and this damage would start to bleed into other facets of his life. Despite all he had been through, Richie displayed signs of intelligence, observational skills, and a sharp sense of humor at an incredibly young age. His sense of humor developed incredibly early as a coping mechanism for the absolute and utter hell that was his childhood. As a youngster, Richie would attend Irving Elementary School in Berwyn, Illinois. At this young age, his parents would divorce. This was a few years before his mother would abandon him. Despite his keen observational skills, when it came to applying himself academically, Richie really struggled and could care less about school. He'd often receive D or F grades from his teachers, and his teachers marked him as apparently unstable emotionally, which led to him being held back a year in the 4th grade. Richie developed an identity as the class cut-up. He was the boy in school who would holler like Tarzan in the halls or play basketball in the manner of his favorite member of the Harlem Globetrotters. It was his way of redirecting the unwanted attention he received as one of the only black kids in his class. Eventually, Richie would transfer schools to Blaine Sumner Elementary School in Peoria, where he would show signs of improvement as a young student. He actually made a deal with one of his teachers where if he showed up to class every single day on time, he would be allowed to perform a 10-minute comedy routine every Friday in front of his peers. Eventually, he found himself performing for a larger audience, that being the entire school. At recess, he started performing his comedy routines at the school's gym entrance and was supported by the Glow Girls, a 4-girl singing group who served as his fellow headliners. While technically this was not stand-up comedy at a comedy club, it's safe to say that Richard Pryor started performing comedy for people as early as the age of 10 years old, and this really helped him bloom into the young artist he would soon become because he was exposed to this outlet of performance at such a young age. It takes many years as a comedian to find your unique comedic voice, so when you begin searching for it as a 10-year-old, you're going to find it much quicker than a guy who starts comedy at the age of 29, so given his experience in performance at an astonishingly early age, Richie would go on to start developing his comedic voice, hence giving him a head start. After finishing the 5th grade, Richie would then transfer to Truan Middle School, where he would continue to do impressions and perform comedy routines for his peers, but it was met with much more resistance and backlash than it was when he was in elementary school. There, the same kids who delighted in his act also bullied him and called him racial epithets on the schoolyard, which deeply upset and angered Richie and affected his ability to perform his comedy routines. Richard's school attendance would start to dramatically decrease due to the repeated bullying and harassment he would face ad nauseum. Things would only get worse for Richie in school. When the time came and Richard turned 14, he would then attend Peoria Central High School. Given the racial tensions being high in the time period, and the school consisting of mostly white teenagers, the bullying and harassment towards black students, coupled with the fact that Richie had an unconventional personality, led to him facing much more bullying and harassment than he had endured in middle school. Then things reached a breaking point for Richie when in the 9th grade he would clash with the science teacher named Walter Fink. Being a former military man, Mr. Fink was a square who took any available opportunity to antagonize Richie for his strange behavior that he saw as unfit for his classroom. Mr. Fink would go all out on Richie because he saw him as a massive disciplinary issue, and one day Richie snapped at Mr. Fink, and their verbal dispute would evolve into a physical altercation after Richie took a swing at him. Unfortunately for Richard, he would get his ass kicked by the former jarhead and vaccine guinea pig, and upon losing the fight, he would be thrown into the hallway. Even worse, Joe Rogan wasn't there to give him a post-fight interview to find out what went wrong. Alright, I'll spare you all the stupid fucking jokes and move on. The altercation led to Richie being expelled from Peoria Central High School at the age of 14 years old, and upon his forceful exit, he would not return to any high school. Despite picking a fight with his teacher, Richard dropping out of high school was not a unique experience for him, because in the 1940s and 50s, black children in Peoria, Illinois were much more likely to drop out of school than white children. In fact, among all the black students who started at Peoria Central High School the same year Richard Pryor started, not a single one of them finished high school given the extreme racial tensions and adversity they encountered. They all either left to start their careers, transferred to different schools, or were expelled like Richard Pryor. Despite all the trouble Richard had been experiencing in school given the bullying and harassment, extreme racial tensions, and his home life being a literal whorehouse, Richie soldiered on in his life with a very clear vision of what he wanted. His time in elementary and middle school performing for his peers and making them laugh made it abundantly clear that he had a knack for entertaining people. His performances and comedy routines really cemented to him how much he loved the thrill of standing in front of people and telling them jokes, so much so that he would eventually try stand-up comedy in a completely different city. But before that, in 1958, when Richie turned 18 years old, he would join the United States Army because apparently he hadn't dealt with enough crap from military guys in his life. During his time in the Army, Richie had a challenging experience that would later influence his comedic material. He served as an entertainer in the Army, participating in talent shows and performing comedy for his fellow soldiers. However, his irreverent and provocative style did not always align with the military's expectations, leading to numerous conflicts with his superiors and him building a reputation for being a big troublemaker. Ritchie's rebellious nature and refusal to conform to general military standards resulted in a series of disciplinary issues. A lot of his time in the military was spent in a military prison because bad boy Ritchie just couldn't comply with direct orders from his superiors. The story of how Ritchie got thrown into military prison is actually quite interesting. It started out that he was stationed in Baumholder, Germany, and first thing in the morning, there was a morning roll call procedure that every branch of the military does to establish a sense of order and routine in the day, and Richard proceeded to skip this meeting, which is a big no-no in the eyes of the military. After being disciplined for this infraction, Ritchie would end up going off on one of his superiors. He hollered out a slew of incredibly offensive racial slurs in Spanish at his colonel, which led to him getting in serious trouble, despite this being admittedly pretty funny coming out of Richard Pryor's mouth considering what he would go on to become. This wasn't the serious trouble that landed him in the stint, though. In 1960, Ritchie and his unit were watching a 1959 film titled The Imitation of Life, which tells the story of how a young mixed-race woman with light skin tries to pass herself off as a white woman. One of the white soldiers laughed really hard at several of the racially charged scenes that were scattered throughout the film, which really pissed off Ritchie and his fellow soldiers that were minorities. Ritchie Pryor and a few of the soldiers then proceeded to jump and stab this guy until he was near death. The white soldier would survive this, and it led to Ritchie and his peers being thrown into military prison for quite a while. Eventually, the army officials bargained with Ritchie and offered to give him an early discharge under honorable conditions instead of escalating his charge. Being that Ritchie was not really a great fit in the military to begin with, he would accept this offer and see his exit from the United States Army in 1960. It was around this time Ritchie would meet Patricia Price, who he would go on to marry in 1960, becoming his first wife. Then in 1961, Richard and Patricia would divorce. What a gyp that turned out to be. This would mark a pattern that was all too common in Richard's life of marrying and divorcing many different women. At this point in Richard's life, he knew he wanted a career in entertainment, but in the meantime he had to figure out a plan to tackle these aspirations in the best way possible. Then in 1963, Ritchie would move to New York City in pursuit of his dream of being a stand-up comedian and entertainer. This was the common path for most aspiring comedians back in the day, which was moving to New York City, which had the most available stage time for up-and-coming comedians. Along with performing in New York City, there was always an opportunity that a television scout for a network would be lurking in the audience at a comedy club who could change your life overnight. Given the foundation of humor Richard had from performing in elementary school and middle school, he would catch on quick and learn how to be funny extremely fast. Also, before Richard really gained any traction as a comedian, he was also a musician. For a short period, Richard Pryor pursued a career as a drummer. He played in various bands showcasing his musical talents, while his primary focus eventually shifted to comedy. His background in music remained a part of his early professional life, and he would often play in venues for free drinks and food, and he was actually quite talented behind the kit.
Come on, Richard. Oh, wait a minute, man. Who told you I could play drums? If you're gonna do that,
Despite Ritchie's love for music, though, he would continue to pursue comedy, and eventually, when he had enough steam and momentum performing stand-up, he would limit drumming to a hobby that he would only do for fun. Then in the early 1960s, Ritchie started performing in small comedy clubs and venues, refining his act in front of live audiences. These performances were crucial in honing his timing, delivery, and the fearless approach that would become his trademark. In his early days in New York City, Richard Pryor performed alongside people such as Woody Allen and Bob Dylan. On one of his first nights performing comedy, he opened for singer and pianist Nina Simone at New York's Village Gate. Nina recalled the young Ritchie Pryor being incredibly nervous on stage and how apparent his anxiety was when performing. She said, quote, "He shook like he had malaria. He was so nervous I couldn't bear to watch him shiver, so I put my arms around him there in the dark and rocked him like a baby until he calmed down. The next night was the same, and the next, and I rocked him each time," end quote. Some of Richard Pryor's comedic influences early in his career were Charlie Chaplin, Jackie Gleason, Red Fox, Bob Hope, Lenny Bruce, and that hypocrite Bill Cosby. Richard Pryor became incredibly well known later in his career for his incredibly filthy and not suitable for work style of humor, but early in his career, his material was actually relatively inoffensive. Richard's comedy was known for its raw and honest portrayal of life, often drawing from his challenging upbringing, personal struggles, and observations of the world around him. He fearlessly tackled issues of race, relationships, and social dynamics. He always had the edge, but he hadn't quite leaned into this dissonance fully just yet. As mentioned, he would take inspiration from Bill Cosby by performing as a middlebrow comedian. Middlebrow humor is a type of humor that is most applicable to the everyman, as opposed to highbrow humor, which is more intellectual, or lowbrow humor that is the much lower common denominator of humor. There's nothing wrong with each respective type of humor, given the fact that everyone has different taste when it comes to what's funny, but middlebrow is exactly that, and that's why it applies to so many people. This path Richard took with his humor was very early on in his career, when he was still honing his craft and trying to find his unique comedic voice. Obviously, his later path would be much different. Richie would continue to gain traction and success as he continued to improve as a comedian, and one of his major points of early success was when he began writing for Red Fox in the early 1960s. The collaboration between Richard Pryor and Red Fox was a significant aspect of Richie's early career. Red Fox, a seasoned and well-respected comedian, provided Richie with an opportunity to showcase his writing talents. This would also eventually manifest itself into future projects that would be adored by comedy fans across the world. Richie co-wrote material for Red Fox, contributing to the development of comedic routines and sketches. This collaboration not only allowed Richie to gain valuable experience in the entertainment industry, but also provided a platform for him to refine his comedic voice. Obviously, in the early days of Richard Pryor, he was a more conventional and TV-friendly comedian, and Red Fox was certainly not that way when he became established and well known for his comedy being extremely blue or crass. This likely had an impact on Richard and inspired him to later become much more experimental in his own act with more provocative and filthy humor. The exact years of Richie's involvement in writing for Red Fox may be sparse, but it is generally considered to be during the early to mid-1960s. This period was crucial in shaping Richie's comedic style and paving the way for his eventual success as a solo comedian. This also meant the world to Richard early in his career because he was quite literally collaborating with one of his personal heroes and comedic influences just a couple years into his comedy career. With Richie's experience writing for Red Fox and his continued comedic development, he would eventually gain some success and start to become a regular guest on television shows such as The Ed Sullivan Show, The Merv Griffin Show, and The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Richard appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show, which was a popular variety show that aired from 1948 to 1971. His appearances on the show helped introduce him to a mainstream audience, and he became known for his sharp wit and observational humor. Even as a middlebrow comic, Richard was still catching the eyes and ears of many because of his seemingly naturally funny delivery of any observation he had. Additionally, Richard had multiple appearances on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson.
Either I'd go to the bars and watch fights. People love to fight when they get drunk. I used to watch them. Especially, they always want to fight Orwell. Orwell was a friend of mine that fought the police. I knew he was bad. Right? Because the police will do anything to you, right? You know, they move along, stop having so much fun. Hey, man, don't push me with no stick, Mr. Officer. I'm all well. 6'5", weigh 235 pounds. Bring fire out my chest. I know you understand. You understand? Now, why don't you call downtown and ask about me all well? Remember last summer when the 15 police come got that and 4 or 5 of them got messed up? That's me.
And Johnny Carson was a highly influential figure in the world of late-night television, and appearing on his show provided comedians a platform to demonstrate to the world what it was that made them so funny through the brilliant comedic interview style that Johnny Carson cultivated. Lastly, Richard also made appearances on The Merv Griffin Show, another popular talk and variety show. These appearances further solidified his presence in the entertainment industry and led to him gaining a sizable stature in the mainstream comedy universe. His ability to address social issues and bring a unique perspective to his comedy set him apart in an era when racial dynamics in the entertainment industry were evolving. Richard Pryor's appearance on these shows played a crucial role in paving the way for his later success in stand-up comedy and film. After several more years passed of Richard Pryor honing his craft of stand-up comedy and appearing on TV, Richard would land his first TV appearance in the show titled The Wild Wild West, which is an American Western espionage and science fiction television series. In the late 60s, Richie would go through what could only be described as an epiphany. He had been working relatively TV clean and middlebrow for years now, and for some reason something just didn't sit right within Richard. He felt like his act was missing some of his quirks and who he was deep down. The story is actually described as such. Richard Pryor walked onto the stage at the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas with Dean Martin in the audience, looked at the sold-out crowd, and exclaimed over the microphone, "What the f*** am I doing here?" and walked off the stage. After the show, Ritchie reflected a lot on his act and how representative of himself he felt it was, and after this he would start to incorporate cussing and racial epithets into his act. Ritchie was already a massive star, thanks to his appearances on variety television shows, and with his transition into more vulgar comedy, his popularity in the mainstream would just continue to skyrocket. On a side note, in 1967, Richard Pryor would marry his second wife named Shelley R. Bonus, but unfortunately they would divorce just 1 year later because of irreconcilable differences. However, his skyrocketing in popularity led to Richard Pryor achieving considerable success in Las Vegas, particularly during the late 1960s and early and later 1970s. Las Vegas was a prominent entertainment hub during this era, with numerous casinos and venues hosting top performers. Richard Pryor, with his groundbreaking comedic style, became a sought-after act in the city's vibrant entertainment scene. One of the leading factors that led to Richard's success in Las Vegas was his successful residency at the Aladdin Hotel in Vegas during the early 1970s. His performances at the hotel's main showroom were well received, and his reputation as a dynamic and edgy comedian continued to grow in Las Vegas and across the rest of the country as well. Given the racial barriers that existed in the 70s, Richard was also a breath of fresh air for the industry. At the time, Las Vegas had a history of segregation and limited opportunities for black performers. Richard's popularity helped challenge these norms, paving the way for other black entertainers. Another thing that led to his success was his vibrant live performances. It's one thing to see a comedian on TV being funny, but it's a completely different thing to stand and deliver a world-class live performance. Richard Pryor was known for his electrifying and unpredictable live performances, and his ability to connect with audiences combined with his fearless and socially relevant material made him a standout performer in a city known for its high-profile acts.
Anybody see George Foreman fight Ken Norton? That is mean. Ain't he mean? I mean, that's the only dude in the world don't have no style. He don't have no style at boxing, right? The bell ring, he just come out right to get ding. And he whooped Norton like Norton said something about his mama or something, right? You know. What you doing? Put your hand down. What you doing with what you got a guard for? You know what I mean?
His transition from an opening act to a nationally touring headliner also made his Vegas residency incredibly successful. This marked a significant step in his career, solidifying his status as one of the most influential comedians of all time. At this point in time, Richard would start to see some success in other realms besides comedy as well. He continued to build his career in film and television, becoming a sought-after talent in Hollywood for acting. His success in these other entertainment realms added to his allure as a performer. Finally, Ritchie's success in Las Vegas contributed to a broader transformation in the entertainment industry, challenging traditional norms and influencing the kinds of acts that could succeed in mainstream venues. Richard Pryor's achievements in Las Vegas reflected not only his comedic brilliance, but also his role in reshaping the landscape of stand-up comedy and entertainment. His legacy in the city is part of a larger narrative of breaking racial and social barriers in the entertainment industry. Then in 1968, Richard would record his debut comedy album titled Richard Pryor with Dove label, and this album would be absolutely huge for him as an artist. Before even turning the album on to listen, the cover photo is this hilarious picture of Ritchie with no clothes on and a bow and arrow, like he's on an island hunting for food. It's pretty hysterical, and then on top of that, the album would show the world why everyone had been talking about Richard Pryor. This album really solidified Ritchie as one of America's most talented working comedians, and it also highlighted the evolution he had undergone as a young comedian starting in New York City in 1960 to a now seasoned professional who will say what he thinks is funny regardless of how some people may feel about the vulgar nature of how it's said. Unfortunately for Richard, in the late 1960s, tragedy would also strike because his mother Gertrude would lose her life, and then just 1 year later, his father Leroy would also die after courageously waging a battle against a heart attack in 1968. With the death of Richard's parents, he would take the appropriate time to mourn their deaths, but then shortly after he would proceed with his career because he had just struck gold and was seeing his career trajectory absolutely moon. Then in 1969, Richard would relocate to Berkeley, California, where he would become immersed in the counterculture movement, and similar to George Carlin, he would very quickly become a counterculture icon. When becoming entrenched in counterculture, Richard would also meet very influential people such as Huey P. Newton, who was the founder of the Black Panther Party, and Ishmael Reed. With all of this, Richard Pryor was finally starting to see the future he had for himself, and with that would be a monumental amount of success in show business. To say Richie had an incredibly brutal upbringing would be an understatement. However, it would not be an excuse because Richie would then go on to see one of the most successful careers as a comedian we've ever seen in the world of comedy. From a little boy who was raised in his grandmother's brothel, to a kid who couldn't avoid bullying and harassment, to a now successfully nationally touring headliner comedian, it seemed like there was nothing that could possibly stop Richard Pryor. Once the 70s got rolling, Richard Pryor's golden years would begin.
What you want? A Bentley, fur coat, a diamond chain? All you blacks want all the same thing.
Richard's incredible performances and residencies in Las Vegas would really lead to him becoming a superstar in the world of show business, not just as a comedian either. Richard would start to act in many movies and write for several TV shows. This period was a time when Richard Pryor was seriously trying to break into mainstream television and movies so he could continue to build his audience while making more money. In the 1970s, Richard wrote for several different television shows such as Sanford & Son and The Flip Wilson Show. When it came to writing on TV shows, Richie would gain a significant amount of experience rather quickly. First on the list for his experience, Richard Pryor contributed his comedic writing talents to The Flip Wilson Show, a groundbreaking variety show that aired from 1970 to 1974. The show starred comedian Flip Wilson and featured a mix of sketch comedy, musical performances, and guest appearances. Wilson's program was known for its innovative format and its significance as one of the first successful variety shows hosted by, now don't laugh at this next part, an African American. Richie joined the writing team of The Flip Wilson Show during its early seasons, and his creative contributions played a role in the show's success. His involvement showcased his versatility as a comedian and writer, contributing to the development of humorous sketches and monologues that resonated with audiences. The Flip Wilson Show was praised for breaking racial barriers and providing a platform for talent amongst black people. Richard Pryor's comedic style, which blended sharp social commentary with humor, added a distinctive flavor to the show's content. The sketches often tackled issues of race and culture, reflecting Richie's ability to infuse comedy with relevant and thought-provoking themes. Richard Pryor's work on The Flip Wilson Show was part of a broader trend in the early 1970s, where black comedians were gaining prominence in mainstream entertainment. Richie's success as a writer for the show contributed to his growing reputation in the industry, paving the way for his future accomplishments in stand-up comedy, film, and television. While Richard Pryor's time as a writer for The Flip Wilson Show may not have been as long-lasting as some of his other ventures, it was a notable chapter in his career. It showcased his ability to contribute to successful mainstream television programs and demonstrated the impact of his comedic voice on a broader audience. Next on the list, Richard Pryor would contribute his writing talents to the popular television sitcom Sanford & Son. The show, which aired from 1972 to 1977, starred Red Fox as Fred G. Sanford, a junk dealer, and DeMond Wilson as his son, Lamont Sanford. The series was known for its humor, memorable characters, and portrayal of black culture. Richie would be a great fit for writing on the show, given his experience as a black man in America during a time of extreme racial tensions. Richie's contribution to Sanford & Son were notable for infusing the show with his incredible comedic sensibilities and unique perspective. His work on the show likely involved crafting jokes, developing comedic situations, and adding elements of the sharp and socially relevant humor that would become synonymous with Pryor's name. The collaboration between Richard Pryor and Red Fox, who were friends and had previously worked together, was significant in breaking new ground for black comedians and writers in mainstream television. Pryor's involvement in writing for Sanford & Son contributed to the show's success and its lasting impact on the portrayal of black characters on television. While Pryor's tenure as a writer on Sanford & Son was relatively brief, similar to The Flip Wilson Show, it represented a significant chapter in his career as he continued to make a mark in various facets of the entertainment industry, showcasing his versatility and influence beyond the stand-up comedy stage. Richard Pryor would not just write on TV shows either. He would also write for Lily Tomlin's TV special titled Lily that featured a variety of stand-up comedy, musical performances, and sketch comedy. In this special, Richie contributed his writing talents to help create memorable and humorous content. The collaboration between Pryor and Tomlin was notable for bringing together two comedic talents with distinctive styles, creating a show that showcased their individual brilliance while also highlighting their ability to collaborate creatively. The special featured Lily Tomlin's signature characters, including Ernestine, the telephone operator, and Edith Ann, a precocious 5.5-year-old girl. Richard Pryor's contributions likely included writing sketches and monologues that complemented Tomlin's comedic range. The era of the early 1970s was marked by a shift in television programming, with a greater emphasis on showcasing diverse voices and breaking away from traditional formats. Richard Pryor's involvement in the Lily Tomlin special was part of this broader trend, where comedians were given more creative freedom to explore edgier and socially relevant material. While Richard Pryor is best known for his stand-up comedy and his impact on the genre, his work as a writer for various TV specials, including collaborations like the one with Lily Tomlin, underscored his versatility and influence across different facets of the entertainment industry. The Lily Tomlin special stands as a testament to Pryor's ability to contribute his comedic genius to a variety of creative projects. He would also share an Emmy Award that was given to Lily and the writing staff for the show. After these writing projects, Richard would start to appear in many different movies. In 1972, Richard Pryor would appear in the movie Lady Sings the Blues as a minor supporting character known as Piano Man. Richard Pryor's role as Piano Man was a departure from his comedic work and showcased his ability to take on dramatic roles. The character was a supportive and caring figure in Billie Holiday's life, adding depth to the narrative. This movie was incredibly well received, and even though Richard wasn't the main focus of the movie, he would really start to get his acting chops outside of comedy. Richard Pryor's career in film continued to flourish, and he became one of the most prominent and influential black actors of his time. His impact on the entertainment industry extended much beyond comedy, making him a trailblazer in various aspects of the performing arts. Then in 1973, Richie would pick up another small role in the blaxploitation movie titled The Mac, which was directed by Michael Campus. In the film, Richard Pryor plays the character Slim, a streetwise and smooth-talking pimp. While Pryor's role in The Mac is not the central focus of the film, his charismatic and comedic presence leaves an impression. His character Slim is a colorful figure within the context of the gritty and urban narrative. While Pryor's role in the film is relatively minor, it reflects his early work in the movie industry before he gained widespread recognition and acclaim for his stand-up comedy and later roles in mainstream films. Then in 1976, Richard Pryor would act as one of the leads in the movie Silver Streak, which was directed by Arthur Hiller. The film starred Gene Wilder, Jill Clayburgh, and Richard Pryor in key roles. This marked the first of several collaborations between Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor in movies. In Silver Streak, Gene Wilder plays George Caldwell, a book editor who finds himself embroiled in a murder plot while traveling on a train from Los Angeles to Chicago. Richard Pryor plays Grover Muldoon, a thief who assists George in navigating the dangers aboard the train. Richie's character Grover provides comedic relief and contributes to the film's humor. The chemistry between Gene and Richard was incredibly evident, and their dynamic interactions became a signature aspect of their later collaborations. Silver Streak is a mix of comedy, romance, and suspense with elements of a classic Hitchcockian thriller. The film was well received for its blend of genres, and the performances of Gene and Richard contributed significantly to its success. Richard Pryor's involvement in Silver Streak showcased his versatility as an actor, allowing him to display both his comedic and dramatic talents. The film remains a notable entry in the comedy thriller genre, and it's remembered as the beginning of the successful partnership between Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor in cinema. There's a lot more movies that Richard Pryor would go on to act in, but for now we're going to continue to talk about some of his comedy successes in this time period. These took place in the early 70s, but where things got real for Richard Pryor was in 1970 when he signed with Laugh Records, which is a comedy-oriented independent record label. Laugh Records had a significant impact on Richard Pryor's early career and played a crucial role in helping him establish himself as a prominent name in comedy. With Laugh Records, he was able to record more comedy albums and get them out to a wider audience. Notable among these were albums like Crap After Hours in 1971 and That Crazy in 1974, which showcased Pryor's observational humor, storytelling abilities, and fearless approach to addressing social issues. Then just 2 years later, Richard Pryor appeared in the documentary What Stacks in 1972, wherein he riffed on the tragic comic absurdities of race relations primarily in Watts, California, and also the rest of the United States. Given the time period still being a relatively sanitary and clean era of entertainment, a lot of record labels were not overly supportive of counterculture acts with vulgarities such as George Carlin, Lenny Bruce, Andrew Dice Clay, and of course Richard Pryor. This was an added benefit to Richie signing with Laugh Records though. They gave Richard Pryor creative freedom to explore explicit and socially relevant material as he saw fit, which might have been considered too edgy by other mainstream labels. The artistic freedom allowed Pryor to push the boundaries of stand-up comedy, addressing taboo subjects with brutal honesty and humor. Richard's albums with Laugh Records gained attention and became commercially successful. That Ninja's Crazy earned Richard Pryor a Grammy Award for Best Comedy Album in 1975, marking a significant milestone in his career and further solidifying his reputation as a groundbreaking comedian in the United States. The album would also become certified gold by the Recording Industry Association of America, or RIAA for short. Richie's body of work produced with Laugh Records would also proceed to have a massive influence on the art of stand-up comedy and the way many young up-and-coming comedians approach the subject matter of their material. It demonstrated that comedians could address challenging and controversial subjects while resonating with a wide audience, paving the way for a new era of more honest and socially conscious comedy. While Richard Pryor's association with Laugh Records was particularly influential during the early 1970s, his career continued to evolve, and he later worked with larger labels as well. Nevertheless, Laugh Records served as a vital platform during the formative years of Pryor's career, allowing him to shape his comedic identity and contribute to the transformation of stand-up comedy in the 1970s. Even after the massive success Richie was seeing while signed under the record label, not long afterwards he sought a deal with a larger label, and in 1973 he signed with Stax Records. When Richie released his third comedy album, That Nacho's Crazy, there was a bit of a legal dispute between Laugh Records and Stax Records over Laugh still holding the recording rights for Richard's comedy albums. Laugh Records nearly succeeded in an injunction which would have prevented the album from being sold publicly. In return for his concession, Laugh was enabled to release previously unissued material recorded between 1968 and 1973 at will. Given the absolute mess that was the legal battle between Richard's previous label Laugh Records and his current label Stax Records, he eventually walked away from both labels and returned to Reprise Records, his original record label. Then in 1975, Richard Pryor would release his fourth comedy special and his first special with Reprise Records titled Is It Something I Said? The album received widespread critical acclaim and is often cited as one of the greatest comedy albums of all time. The album earned Richard Pryor a Grammy Award for Best Comedy Album in 1976. This recognition further solidified Pryor's status as a groundbreaking and influential figure in the world of comedy. In addition to that, it was eventually certified platinum by the RIAA. After winning these awards, Richard Pryor would proceed to make history again, because in 1975, Pryor was a guest host on the first season of Saturday Night Live and the first black person to host the show. Despite Saturday Night Live being on NBC, Richard would not shy away from his controversial and edgy style while performing the monologue. His opening monologue for the show was incredibly controversial and groundbreaking for the time. He addressed racial issues, using humor to discuss race relations and the flagrant use of the N-word. The unfiltered and raw nature of this monologue was unprecedented for network television at the time. Then another part about this that was incredibly memorable was Richard's collaboration with Chevy Chase in the show's sketches. One of the most iconic sketches from that episode was the word association sketch with Chevy Chase. In this sketch, Pryor and Chase engage in a word association game where the humor arises from the racial tension inherent in their responses.
Fast, slow, rain, snow, tar baby. Colored, redneck. Jungle bunny, pack of wood.
The sketch is considered a classic and is remembered for its sharp and daring comedic commentary. This was not only a pivotal moment for Richie's career, but also absolutely huge for Saturday Night Live, given the show being so new and Pryor being so big. Pryor's appearance on Saturday Night Live was a turning point for the show, helping it gain cultural significance and critical acclaim. The success of the episode also contributed to Saturday Night Live's reputation as a platform for addressing social and political issues through comedy. Richard Pryor's hosting of Saturday Night Live in 1975 remains a watershed moment in television history. His unapologetic approach to addressing race and social issues on a major network was groundbreaking, influencing the trajectory of comedy on television and opening doors for greater diversity in the industry. Then in 1976, Richard Pryor would release yet another brilliant special that would be titled Bicentennial. Just by the title, you can tell that this album is not only incredibly controversial, but it's also widely regarded as some of Richard Pryor's most daring and thought-provoking work. The title itself reflects Richie's unapologetically confrontational approach to racial issues and societal norms during a period that included the United States bicentennial celebration in 1976. The album marked a point in Pryor's career where he continued to push boundaries, moving beyond conventional stand-up comedy. His willingness to explore uncomfortable and controversial subjects demonstrated his commitment to addressing societal issues through his art. This comedy special is a testament to Richard Pryor's ability to use comedy as a medium for exploring difficult and important subjects. The album remains a powerful example of Pryor's influence on stand-up comedy and his legacy as a trailblazer in addressing social issues through humor. The special would also prove massively successful with critics and comedy fans alike because it would mark Richard's third consecutive comedy special that would win a Grammy Award for Best Comedy Album and become certified gold. I think this special is undoubtedly one of Richard Pryor's best specials ever, so I'm going to save the nitty-gritty details along with my personal thoughts on the special for the stand-up comedy special section. Before I move on, I'd like to ask that if you're enjoying the video so far, to please like the video and subscribe to the channel because you guys have nothing to lose by doing so, and it also inspires me to keep making these videos better and better for all of you. Anyway, the drama would continue with Richard's old and current record labels even years later because with every successful album Pryor recorded for Warner, Laugh published an album of older material to capitalize on Richard's growing fame. This was a pattern they would follow until 1983. Going back to the 70s though, with Richard Pryor's widespread acclaim, he would then receive the opportunity to do his own variety show titled The Richard Pryor Show, which premiered on NBC in 1977. The show marked Richard Pryor's attempt to bring his unique brand of comedy to a mainstream audience through a primetime network program. The show premiered on September 13, 1977 as a primetime special and later transitioned into a regular series. It featured a mix of comedy sketches, musical performances, and guest appearances. Richard Pryor assembled a diverse cast that included established comedians and actors such as Robin Williams, John Witherspoon, Sandra Bernhard, and Paul Mooney. The cast also included up-and-coming talents who would later become successful in their own right. The Richard Pryor Show faced challenges and controversies due to its edgy and unconventional content. The show's humor pushed the boundaries of what was considered acceptable for network television at the time, leading to clashes with network executives over censorship and content control. Despite its critical acclaim and Pryor's undeniable comedic genius, the show struggled with low ratings and was canceled after only 4 episodes. The network's concerns about the controversial content and the difficult time slot may have contributed to its short-lived run. Richard Pryor's creative vision for the show aimed to address social issues, challenge stereotypes, and provide a platform for a diverse range of voices. While the show faced challenges, it was ahead of its time in terms of pushing the boundaries of what could be explored on network television. Despite its brief run, The Richard Pryor Show left a lasting impact on the comedy landscape. It is remembered as a groundbreaking effort to bring Pryor's uncompromising and socially conscious comedy to a broader audience. While The Richard Pryor Show was short-lived, Richard Pryor's influence on comedy and television continued to grow. His subsequent work in stand-up, film, and other projects further solidified his status as one of the greatest and most influential comedians in the history of American entertainment. Then in 1979, Richard Pryor would take a trip to Kenya, and this would dramatically change Richard's approach to comedy. Upon returning to the United States from Africa, Richie swore up and down he would never use the N-word in his stand-up comedy routine again. Then in 1980, Richard Pryor would make history yet again by being the first black actor to earn $1 million for a single film when he was hired to star in Stir Crazy, which was directed by Sidney Poitier. The film would mark the second collaboration between Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor following The Silver Streak in 1976. The film follows the misadventures of two friends, Skip Donahue played by Gene and Harry Monroe played by Richard, who find themselves wrongfully convicted of a bank robbery. Sentenced to a lengthy prison term, they must navigate the challenges and eccentricities of prison life. Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor's on-screen chemistry and comedic partnership were central to the film's success. Their contrasting styles, Wilder's neurotic and Pryor's energetic type of humor, created a dynamic that resonated with audiences everywhere. Stir Crazy was a commercial success, becoming one of the highest-grossing films of 1980. The popularity of the film was fueled by the comedic talents of Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor, as well as the engaging storyline that combined elements of comedy and adventure. Sidney Poitier, a highly respected actor and director, helmed Stir Crazy. The film showcased his ability to handle comedic material, and his collaboration with Wilder and Pryor proved to be a winning formula. While Stir Crazy is primarily a comedy, it includes elements of social commentary, particularly in its depiction of the challenges faced by the protagonist within the prison system. The film touches on themes of justice, friendship, and resilience. The success of Stir Crazy further solidified Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor as a popular comedic duo in Hollywood. Their chemistry and the success of their collaborations contributed to their status as one of the most iconic pairings in comedy film history. Stir Crazy remains a notable entry in the filmographies of both Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor. The film's blend of humor, adventure, and social commentary, along with the dynamic performances of the lead actors, has contributed to its enduring popularity. This movie was one of Richard Pryor's biggest movies yet, and it certainly amplified the superstardom that he was already experiencing at this point in his career. I also find it worth noting, later, in 1998, Richard Pryor won the first Mark Twain Prize for American Humor from the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. According to the former Kennedy Center president, Lawrence J. Wilker, Pryor was selected as the first recipient of the prize because, quote, as a stand-up comic, writer, and actor, he struck a chord and a nerve with America, forcing it to look at large social questions of race and more tragicomic aspects of the human condition. Though uncompromising in his wit, Pryor, like Twain, projects a generosity of spirit that unites us. They were both trenchant social critics who spoke the truth, however outrageous, end quote. I know this was years after the 70s, but I felt it was worth noting when talking about Richard Pryor's accomplishments. Anyways, the golden years of Richard were absolutely marvelous. However, along with this massive success, came an accident that nobody saw coming. This accident would undoubtedly change Richard Pryor for the rest of his life.
They throwing hate at me, want me to stay at ease. Fuck you and your corporation, y'all niggas can't control me.
On June 9th, 1980, while on a freebasing binge during the making of the film, Richard Pryor suffered a widely reported and serious incident in which he completely set himself on fire. The incident occurred at Richard's home in Northridge, California. As we discussed earlier, given Richard Pryor's incredibly rugged upbringing, he always struggled with drug addiction and substance abuse, and on this night, he was reportedly freebasing cocaine. Freebasing is a method of smoking a purified form of cocaine. It involves converting the drug into a vapor that can be inhaled for a more intense and immediate effect. During the freebasing process, a highly flammable substance used in the preparation ignited. The flames quickly engulfed Richie, causing severe burns to a significant portion of his body. Pryor's wife, Jennifer Lee, and a security guard, Joe Cooper, were present at the scene and rushed to extinguish the flames. Pryor was immediately taken to the hospital, where he received treatment for his burns. Richie suffered extensive burns, especially on his upper body. It's reported that he suffered burns on more than 50% of his body, and it was an incredibly arduous process to save his life. He underwent multiple surgeries and a challenging recovery process as well. The incident attracted significant media attention, and Pryor's struggle with addiction and the circumstances surrounding the incident were widely reported. It became a pivotal moment in Pryor's life, prompting him to reevaluate his lifestyle and contribute to changes in his personal and professional priorities. After the incident, Richard Pryor incorporated the experience into his comedy material. In his stand-up special, Richard Pryor, Live on the Sunset Strip, released in 1982, Richard candidly addressed the incident, turning a painful and traumatic event into a source of humor and reflection. The self-immolation incident marked a critical juncture in Richard Pryor's life. While the accident was a tragic event, it also became a turning point that influenced Richard's personal and professional growth. His ability to confront and incorporate such a traumatic experience into his comedy reflected Pryor's unique approach to using humor as a means of processing and communicating profound aspects of the human experience. He reflects on the freebasing incident and how it changed him and his outlook on life. He talks about how the doctors who specialize in burns kept talking to him about washing him and just how awful it was for him to be washed. I'll show you a snippet of it right here.
But these motherfuckers, man, and this Larry Murphy used to come in, we're gonna wash you rich and we're gonna wash you down and you're gonna feel great. We're gonna wash you. He kept saying it. I said, yeah, we're gonna wash you, put you in the tub and wash you. He said, yeah, motherfucker, you're gonna wash me. When you gonna wash me? All right, put your arms up, open up, because I'm gonna wash me, mother. He said, now it's time to wash you. Ready? I said, yeah. Mother said, don't wash me no more. Not even my little finger.
Obviously, this whole experience changed Richard Pryor and his outlook on life forever. and I'm certain that it made him want to steer clear of drugs that involved fire, at least for a little while. If you'd like to find more details about the burning incident with Richard Pryor, I'd recommend checking out the article by People magazine titled "Richard Pryor's Widow Jennifer Lee Calls His 1980 Fire Incident a Suicide Attempt. He Warned Me." The article gives more details on the situation. With the title, this article implies that Richard Pryor burning up was an attempt to take his own life, which is a much more sinister outlook on what happened. However, the fact that this information was given by his widow Jennifer Lee, someone who was once connected with Richard intimately and was very aware of how he was feeling, gives this claim quite a bit of credence. Whether it truly was an attempt on his own life or not, we may never fully know for certain. This was a story shared by Jennifer Lee, and we have no idea if she exaggerated part of the story or not. However, Jennifer did go on to tell a story on Joey Diaz's podcast about the time she caught Richard freebasing at the house and how she had to move out. I'll let her tell the story.
When he was working on, right before Stir Crazy, he started that. And I came into the house one day, and I'm like, what's that smell? The first time he did freebase, he lit the mattress on fire. I mean, Richard was an arsonist from back in the day.
Me too.
I mean, but I said, Richard, what? And we dragged the mattress into the bathtub. That shit. And I did that with him for about 10 days. And I'm like, I'm out. I can't, that shit. I could snort. And I could keep that under control. This shit was like, what kind of high is this? It's like someone took a mallet and goes, whap. You're just non-compos mentis. You're not thinking, you're not aware. I said, I got to get out of here, Richard. And anyway, I wrote a poem to Richard, and I said, Richard, this is not working. I said, the way you made love to me was a shame and a disgrace. Your ice-cold heart chilled my soul. Your woman is freebase.
It's very sad to hear from her how she felt like Richard loved freebasing more than he loved her. But man, what a battle axe this woman was, trying to take Richard away from what he loved most. I'm just kidding. All in all, the fire incident marked a time in Richard's life where he underwent drastic self-reflection, similar to his trip to Kenya where he decided to never use the N-word in his stand-up comedy act again. In this situation, though, I believe Richard was thankful to still be alive and decided he wanted to try and live a slightly safer life in terms of his lifestyle. This was Richard Pryor's fire incident.
I know that we the new slave. I'm about to wild the fuck out. I'm going Bobby Boucher.
Along with delivering some of the best comedy specials the world has ever seen, Richard Pryor also had some absolutely legendary late-night television appearances. The two shows he would appear on the most were Late Night with David Letterman and The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. I will first talk about his appearances with David Letterman's show. Pryor made several appearances on Late Night with David Letterman during the show's early years in the 1980s. These appearances allowed viewers to see Pryor's candid and humorous side in a more relaxed and conversational setting. Pryor's appearances typically included interviews with Letterman, during which he discussed a variety of topics, including his career, personal life, and current projects. Richie was known for his engaging storytelling and ability to infuse humor in almost any subject. One memorable moment occurred during one of Pryor's appearances when he discussed his trip to Africa. He shared humorous anecdotes about his experiences and interactions during the journey. Richard's ability to blend comedy with insightful commentary made his appearances on the show stand out dramatically. David Letterman had a great deal of respect as well for Richard Pryor, and their interactions on the show reflected a genuine admiration for Pryor's contributions to comedy. Letterman often allowed Pryor the freedom to express himself in a way that showcased his unique comedic voice. Pryor continued to appear on various late-night talk shows, including those hosted by David Letterman as his career progressed. Each appearance provided a platform for Richie to share his views on comedy, society, and his own personal experiences. Richie's appearances on Late Night with David Letterman are a part of his broader legacy in the world of comedy. His ability to connect with audiences through humor and storytelling, even in a talk show format, contributed to his status as a comedic icon. Richard Pryor's influence extended far beyond the stage and screen, and his appearances on talk shows like Late Night with David Letterman allowed audiences to see different facets of his personality. The interviews and interactions with Letterman showcased Pryor's wit, charm, and enduring impact on the world of comedy. One of my favorite moments of Richard Pryor on Late Night with David Letterman was in 1987 when he discussed how it feels to come back to New York City when you haven't been there in a long time. I'll show you some of the interview here. Check it out.
When you come back to New York, you haven't been there for a while, you realize how big it is. Mm-hmm. It's like very big, and people are moving all the time. They don't stop for nothing. Yeah. They just go, 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 go. I can't wait to get back in the hotel and go,
yeah. People are just want to be all over you, don't they?
No. No, they don't. They don't bother me at all. I'm with my son, so they...
In public, that they would want to get up there and shake your hand and pat you on the back and stuff.
Oh, Damn. Jeez, Dave.
No.
I haven't been on the road in a while. I want to go after my next film. I like to get back and do a concert so you can get in front of people and they can ask you, where'd you get them shoes?
There are some pretty awesome observations, and Richie delivers them with his witty style and has that incredibly remarkable way of storytelling to hook you in the entire time. It's truly a spectacle to watch. Finally, Richard Pryor also made numerous appearances on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, one of the most iconic late-night talk show hosts in television history. This was Richie's bread and butter when it came to TV appearances. Pryor was a frequent guest on The Tonight Show throughout the 1970s and 1980s. His appearances were highly anticipated, and his charismatic and dynamic presence made him a favorite of both Carson and the audience. Pryor often performed stand-up comedy during his appearances, showcasing his razor-sharp wit and observational humor. His stand-up routines on the show were well received and contributed to his reputation as one of the greatest stand-up comedians of all time. In addition to his comedy performances, Pryor engaged in candid and memorable interviews with Johnny Carson. These interviews provided insights into Pryor's life, career, and perspectives on various topics. Pryor's authenticity and humor made him a captivating guest. Richie's appearances on The Tonight Show were significant in breaking racial barriers on television. As one of the first black comedians to achieve widespread success, Richard Pryor's presence on a mainstream show like Johnny Carson's helped pave the way for greater diversity in late-night television. Pryor often used his appearances on The Tonight Show to promote his latest projects, including film and stand-up specials. Carson's show provided a valuable platform for Pryor to connect with a broad audience and generate interest in his work. Johnny Carson, the legendary host of The Tonight Show, held Pryor in the highest regard. Carson recognized Richie's talents and impact on comedy, and their on-screen chemistry made for memorable television moments. Richard Pryor's appearances on The Tonight Show are part of his lasting legacy in the world of entertainment. His ability to transcend racial and social barriers through comedy, combined with his captivating storytelling, made him a groundbreaking figure in the genre. Richard Pryor's contributions to late-night television, particularly on The Tonight Show, played a role in shaping the landscape of comedy and influencing future generations of comedians. His humor, honesty, and charisma left an indelible mark on the cultural fabric of American entertainment. I think the most legendary appearance Richard made on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson was right after Richard lit himself on fire, and he has quite the emotional roller coaster talking about what happened and reflecting on the situation candidly. That being said, he's still able to make some hilarious jokes on the spot about this incredibly difficult time for him. Check it out.
I don't know where to start. First of all, how you feeling?
I feel...
Don't do that to me. I was... What?
Here in L.A. one time, and people beat me to death.
Right.
I mean, Richard! My man!
Good to see you back. You don't need that, huh?
I watched myself on TV. They said I was going to die. I had a TV in my room, and I hit the button, and I turned it on, and they said, Richard Pryor's dying. I said, oh, my God. I hope I die before the 11 o'clock.
This is one of the best late-night appearances of all time, and Richard's response to the fire incident cemented him as one of the funniest comedians to ever do it, and also really puts into perspective just how talented he is to be able to go on and be funny after facing something so beyond frightening. These were some of my favorite late-night TV appearances featuring Richard Pryor.
Meanwhile, the DEA teamed up with the CCA. They try and lock niggas up. They try and make new states.
Richard Pryor is one of the greatest comedians to ever pick up a microphone and tell jokes, and along with his many years of being active as a comedian came some absolutely brilliant comedy specials. Richard Pryor's comedy discography includes all of the following specials: Richard Pryor, Craps After Hours, That Crazy, Is It Something I Said, Are You Serious, Rev Do Right, Holy Smoke, Bicentennial, Insane, LA Jail, Who Me? I'm Not Him, Richard Pryor Live, The Wizard of Comedy, Black Ben the Blacksmith, Wanted Live in Concert, Outrageous, Richard Pryor Live on the Sunset Strip, Super, Richard Pryor Here and Now, Richard Pryor Live, Blackjack, and most recently, Netflix released Live at the Comedy Store, 1973, which was an old tape of Richie. Out of all these specials, I have not seen every single one of them, but my two favorites I've seen are Live on the Sunset Strip and Bicentennial. First of all, we will discuss Live on the Sunset Strip. This special was shot during a time when Richard Pryor had recently experienced a life-altering event, being the self-immolation incident in 1980 where he lit himself on fire. Pryor's struggle with addiction and personal challenges became part of his comedic narrative, and Live at the Sunset Strip was an opportunity for him to address those experiences head-on the stage. The performance is known for its candid and reflective nature. Richard addresses the freebasing incident using humor to share his own perspective on the traumatic event. This ability to find humor in personal tragedy was characteristic of Richard Pryor's comedic style. As with much of Pryor's work, the stand-up routine goes beyond personal anecdotes to provide social commentary. He tackles issues of race, relationships, and societal challenges with a blend of humor and incisive observation. The film is praised for its intimate and personal feel. Pryor's ability to connect with the audience on a deeply personal level, sharing his vulnerabilities and insights, contributed to the special's impact. Live at the Sunset Strip also received critical acclaim for its honesty, humor, and Pryor's masterful storytelling. The film is often regarded as one of the greatest stand-up comedy specials ever recorded. The special is considered an essential part of Pryor's legacy. It not only showcases his incredible comedic talent, but also highlights his resilience and willingness to confront personal challenges through his art. The album of the same name, featuring audio from the live performance, won a Grammy Award for Best Comedy Recording in 1982. The Grammy recognition further solidified the impact and importance of Pryor's work. Furthermore, this was an amazing special to see, and it really was amazing to see how Richard would reflect after lighting himself on fire in the special, and he absolutely delivered on this promise. Live at the Sunset Strip stands as a testament to Pryor's ability to turn personal struggles into powerful and humorous storytelling. The film captures a pivotal moment in Pryor's career and remains a landmark in the world of stand-up comedy. Finally, as promised, I will discuss my favorite Richard Pryor special, Bicentennial. For the sake of my career and survival on the internet, I will be calling this special just Bicentennial for the rest of the video. The material on the album delves into the complex and often uncomfortable realities of racism and race relations in America. Pryor fearlessly addresses topics such as slavery, racial stereotypes, and the struggles faced by black people. The content is raw, explicit, and unapologetically honest. The album was released during the United States Bicentennial, which marked the 200th anniversary of the country's independence. Pryor used this occasion as a backdrop to provide a critical and satirical examination of America's history and the ongoing challenges faced by black Americans. As with much of Richard's work, Bicentennial goes beyond comedy to offer insightful social commentary. Pryor's ability to blend humor with sharp observations about race, politics, and human nature set him apart as a groundbreaking comedian. Bicentennial earned Richard Pryor a Grammy Award for Best Comedy Album in 1977. The recognition from the Grammy Awards highlighted the impact and significance of Pryor's work in the world of comedy. The album marked a point in Pryor's career where he continued to push boundaries, moving beyond conventional stand-up comedy. His willingness to explore uncomfortable and controversial subjects demonstrated his commitment to addressing societal issues through his art. Bicentennial is a testament to Richard Pryor's ability to use comedy as a medium for exploring difficult and important subjects. The album remains a powerful example of Pryor's influence on stand-up comedy and his legacy as a trailblazer in addressing social issues through humor. Before I end this segment, I want to also share one of my favorite Richard Pryor stand-up moments of all time. In this video, Richard Pryor is being heckled, and he handles the heckling like an absolute boss. It remains one of my favorite heckler videos of all time because of how cool Richard plays the situation. I'll show you some of it here. Check it out.
Back there, man, in Chicago in the Midwest, boy, it gets cold. I'm talking about cold. Make you change your... What is...
This ain't Johnny Carson, mother.
I love the reply that this isn't Johnny Carson. It's absolutely hilarious and completely off the cuff. Most comedians, when they get heckled like this, will lose their cool and sometimes try to destroy the heckler. But Richard just stays in the pocket after throwing out this clever little line and weaves right back into his act like a true professional. A lot of hecklers aren't as malicious as they're framed to be, while some of them just genuinely want to be part of the show, and comedians can get really aggressive towards them. But in this instance, Richard is absolutely being rudely interrupted, and he just handles it like a boss. He continues to handle these drunk hecklers. Watch this.
Bullshit! Bullshit! My dick. People in the audience get hostile. You drunk, mother... I used to drink a lot. Stop. Been 7 months.
I don't believe that shit.
Oh, you don't have to. I know you ain't gonna believe it because you f***ed up.
He's just deflecting these drunk cries for attention so masterfully. Then they try to get really personal and ask Rich about his mother, who at the time had been dead for years, and Rich just takes his time and disarms the heckler calmly. Check it out.
How's your mama?
Well, how's my mama?
I beg your pardon. I'll slap you in the mouth with my dick.
It's absolutely amazing. This is exactly how a heckler should be handled. Obviously, the more aggressive the heckler, the more aggressive I'd say the comedian is allowed to be, but Richie Pryor was just cold as ice when he would deal with hecklers. I also really enjoy the material he's on, where he's talking about cold weather in the Midwest and how he personifies the wind. Check this out.
I mean, it get cold when you go outside, the wind be waiting on your ass around the corner like this.
Here you come.
And that shit, boy, it was cold. That wind waited for me to get into the street. It didn't even do nothing while I was walking through the airport. As soon as I got outside, it was like, get your shit, put that shit up around your head. Stop fucking phone.
I think the analogy that the wind is waiting on your ass around the corner is absolutely hilarious. All in all, Richard Pryor being such a brilliant artist, it's no shock that he has such a timeless and hilarious discography full of some of the best comedy specials to ever be recorded. These were some of my favorite stand-up comedy specials by Richard Pryor. This is always my least favorite part of the video, but here it goes. In November 1977, after many long years of heavy smoking and drinking, Richard Pryor had a mild heart attack at the age of 36. This would prove to be a long-term health issue that Richard would deal with for the rest of his time alive. He then recovered and resumed performing in January of the next year. Then in 1986, things got worse for Richard when he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Then in 1990, Richie had a second heart attack while touring in Australia. He underwent triple heart bypass surgery in 1991. It would seem that given Richard's lifestyle, his substance abuse and heavy alcoholism was writing checks that his body simply couldn't cash. On the morning of December 10, 2005, just 9 days after he turned 65 years old, Richard Pryor had a third heart attack at his house in Los Angeles, California. After his wife's failed attempts to resuscitate him, he was taken to a local West Side hospital where he was pronounced dead at 7:58 a.m. His widow, Jennifer, was quoted as saying, quote, "At the end, there was a smile on his face," end quote. He was cremated, and his ashes were given to his family, and his ashes were scattered in the bay at Hana, Hawaii, by his widow in 2019. Forensic pathologist Michael Hunter believes Richard Pryor's fatal heart attack was caused by coronary artery disease that was at least partially brought about by years of smoking tobacco. His death was met with an outpouring of love and support from friends and family, but then many comedians also had incredibly kind words to say about Richie. Jerry Seinfeld called Pryor, quote, "the Picasso of our profession," end quote. And Bob Newhart considered Richard Pryor as, quote, "the seminal comedian of the last 50 years," end quote. When Dave Chappelle spoke on Richard Pryor, he said, quote, "You know those, like, evolution charts of man? He was the dude walking upright. Richard was the highest evolution of comedy," end quote. This legacy can be attributed in part to the unusual degree of intimacy Richard brought to bear on his comedy. As Bill Cosby reportedly once said, quote, "Richard Pryor drew the line between comedy and tragedy as thin as one could possibly paint it," end quote. Then in 2004, shortly before his death, Comedy Central had voted Richard Pryor #1 on Comedy Central's list of the 100 greatest stand-up comedians of all time. Then after his death, Pryor was posthumously awarded the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 2006. It was beyond otherworldly how much of an impact Richard Pryor had on the art form of stand-up comedy. The craziest part about how influential and how funny Richard was is that sometimes he himself didn't even believe it. There's an interview of Jim Carrey where he talks about talking with Richard Pryor, and I'll just let Jim tell you the story. Check this out.
I found myself in the parking lot one night, 21 years old, and standing. Everybody else left, and suddenly I found myself standing with Richard Pryor.
Yeah,
which is enough to, for any comic to just wet his pants.
Yeah,
and we passed a joint back and forth. And he said, "Be careful with this stuff." And he said, "I don't remember 40 years of my life." And I said, "What?" And I was dumbfounded. I said, "What?" And he said, "I'm not sure it was me." And it was like a harpoon going through me, like the greatest of all time. I was having those kind of doubts.
Yeah.
Of course it was him.
Right.
Of course it was everything he'd ever lived.
Right.
But at that moment, he was having real serious doubts about whether it was him who was inspired to do it or it was the drugs.
Even after his undeniable success, There was always a doubt in Richard's head that made him think he didn't know if it was really him out there making all these people laugh. This is a stunning amount of humility given the monumental amount of achievements Richard had obtained over the years. It might seem negative for an artist to have this view of themselves, but I would argue that it is a very healthy mindset to have because it helps you reflect and continue to grow as an artist rather than just fizzling out and plateauing in your ability. It's apparent to me that most of the best artists have this train of thought, at least to some extent, and they use it to continue to extract tools from themselves that they can use to produce better and better art over many years of performing their craft. All in all, Richard Pryor's impact on stand-up comedy cannot be overstated. He's had a profound impact on the art of comedy and influenced some of the greatest comedians who've ever lived. Along with that, he left behind a body of work that will be appreciated and admired for years to come. Whether you're watching one of his many comedy specials, or you're watching Harlem Nights with your father like I do, you will come to appreciate Richard Pryor and the massive and beautiful impact he had on the world. Long live Richard Pryor. May he rest in peace. This has been Richard Pryor, the comedy trailblazer. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching the video all the way to the end. If you want to support the channel, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, turn on post notifications, and share this video with a friend because that's the easiest way to support the channel and it's completely free. And if you didn't like the video, make sure to send it to somebody that you don't like. Richard Pryor was a very special comedian and I thought today's video was a very good way to kind of document what made him so important to me, what made him so funny to me, and what I think made him so special to so many other people as well. If you guys want to support the channel further, you can check out my Patreon page down below where you get to see some exclusive content, you get to see videos early, you get to play a direct hand in the direction my channel takes, and you also get shoutouts every single video. Shout out to Jason Murray, Crossblocker, Ethan, and Thomas Gill for supporting me on Patreon. Anyway guys, we have some awesome videos coming down the pipe. I hope you guys are excited because I sure am. Make sure you guys take care of yourselves, your friends, your families, your loved ones, anybody important to you, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.